husband, she grabs the tent, and they hike. And she tells the story as they confront the difficulties of nature, as they confront the harshness of the sea winds, as they walk mile after mile, conquering nature in some ways transforms them. She has a mystical experience of transformation. Now she says, I don't believe in God. She says that clearly. She says, all we are is a cycle of carbon. If there's a God, she says, this God took my life and uprooted it and shaped it. But nevertheless, in confronting nature, she finds something spiritual that changes her. To such an extent that as winter comes, they have to get off the salt path and they have to find some permanent housing for a few months. And when that happens, she loses her true self. Moth sickness comes back. So there is this sense that even confronting nature in this way heals. It does something healing. Again, no God, no need for the Christian tradition. But if you, is the proclamation. The story of salvation here is that if you too can conquer nature, it can heal you. If you too can climb that mountain and overcome, if you do something heroic that you never thought you could do, and you do it, you'll have this deep transformation. An American example of this, there was one by, Strand was her name, Wild. It became a Reese Witherspoon movie. Same kind of dynamic. She's dealing with drug addiction, she's dealing with brokenness. The sense is if she can just walk the Pacific Trail, and it is not a nice, warm story. It's a heroic thing. She has to face the bugs and the heat, but if she can do this, if she can conquer this, if she can overcome all the constraints of nature, she can heal. And she even says, I healed myself one step at a time. So there's all these kind of senses that this can be a spirituality for you. If you can confront nature, you can do it. Now, I said this is a bit controversial. What's controversial is this is going to be made into a movie. And so as they've written the script, they realize a lot of the stuff she said didn't really happen. So if you have found this a great moment of salvation, you feel a bit lied to. I think it actually fits my methodology well, because she is trying to proclaim a sermon. So even though it didn't happen, here's the mythology of what can change a soul, what can change a life, is if you overcome nature. Now again, if I took hope in that, and that was like, yes, that's what I want for me, to find out she didn't do that would be very problematic. But it shows you at least one kind of side on this heroic action that you can be changed if you can deal with the harshness of nature and overcome it. Second example on this kind of counter-enlightenment side are vocation. There are all these memoirs about kind of finding your one vocation, your one calling in the world, and beating all your competition in it. An example of this is this book called Yes Chef by Marcus Samuelsson. I don't know if you've read this. Interesting book. So it starts with a walk, just like Run Air Wins. He grows up in Ethiopia during the famine. He loses both of his parents, or he thinks he loses both of his parents. His father, he discovers towards the middle of his life, is still alive. But he thinks he's an orphan. He walks, gets to the capital in Ethiopia, and is adopted by Swedish parents. So he grows up in Sweden. And the way he kind of comes to grips with being an Ethiopian kid living in Sweden is by cooking. So he discovers this passion for cooking, and he feels it. He says he feels a calling, not necessarily from God. He never really mentions that. But he feels some kind of calling that he is supposed to be a chef. And his whole life then becomes about how to become the greatest chef in the world. How he'll do that. How he'll become one of the world's greatest chefs. And it becomes very much a kind of heroic tale, because it's a Viking story. It ultimately is a Viking story, where he says, if you are willing, and this is what he proclaims to you, the reader, if you can do it, it might not be cooking, but if you find that one thing that you're supposed to do, and you are willing to work and work and work and grind and grind and grind, and you are willing to go nose to nose with all your competition and beat them, but you live for just that one thing, you too can be saved. You too can find this great transformation within you. So he tells us the story that he starts on this path to become a great chef. He ends up a sous chef as he's going in the Alps. He falls in love with this woman. She ends up pregnant. She's like 6 months pregnant or something, and he gets the phone call. The phone call from New York City. the very epic location you want to be if you want to be the world's greatest chef. It's a really fascinating kind of moral imagination, because he gets the call, and in the memoir, he tells us he doesn't think twice. I mean, he's got a woman who is pregnant with his child, and it's like, when you get the call, are you willing to go? I mean, so much a Viking story. Are you willing to burn all the boats that even include this woman and her child to go after the one goal you're supposed to go after? And he says, you know, like when you're in a kitchen in New York City, it's a gladiator ring, man. It's full-fledged, full-contact war, and you work 18 hours a day. So he basically wakes up, and this little girl that was 3 months from being born when he left is now 12. Like 12 years have gone past like that. He hasn't even barely talked to her in this whole time. But he never really has any qualms or any guilt about doing this. It's like, this is what it takes. This is what it takes to be the best. Are you willing to do it? And of course, the memoir ends, which he's accomplished it. He ends up the chef at the Red Rooster restaurant in New York City, and he serves meals to some of the greatest politicians and celebrities in culture. But the point of the story is, if you can heroically go after your one thing, figure out what it is, and if you go for it and are willing to burn your boats for just this, you too can find salvation. You too can find a spirituality as you do that. Again, listen to this anthropology. You are magnificent. Are you willing to fight for it? Are you willing to beat all your competitions? There's something in you that's magnificent. Can you get there? Can you heroically get out there? Notice also that the kind of sense of the transcendent or the sense of the spiritual starts in the self, and it is about what the self overcomes. So it moves from in the self to what the self overcomes. I find a great spirituality as I end up one of the best cooks, as I confront nature and we beat it or we overcome it. The third one on this side are all of these memoirs around sickness. And you can see I've moved this up the line a little bit towards the Beyonders, because I really do think this is something really heroic. I mean, if one of my family members was diagnosed with a terminal illness, I would really want them to heroically fight it. There's something beautiful about this. So an example of this is this memoir, Between Two Kingdoms, which is about this young woman who gets diagnosed with cancer. And she says, I can't remember the exact number, but something like she battles her disease, battles cancer for like 1,500 days or something like that. It's like nearly a decade of treatment after treatment after treatment. And she tells the story of how others heroically fought their battle with cancer, but they lost it. You know, so she tells the stories of death. But of course the memoir ends and she's overcome. She's overcome it. Now again, I want to underline, there's something really beautiful about that. But the overall assertion, again, is a very heroic one, which is just never give up. Don't ever give up. Now if you're a college basketball fan, you if you watch ESPN, you know like every October they raise money for cancer research in the Jimmy Valvano Foundation. And they show us, you know, Jimmy Valvano was like North Carolina State basketball coach who had this heroic run to the NCAA tournament, won the national championship, then gets diagnosed with cancer, and at a banquet gives this speech where he says, don't ever give up. Whatever you do, don't ever give up. And ESPN shows that for the last 35 years, has shown that clip every October to raise money for cancer research. But this is essentially the heroic element of it. Don't ever give up. Just fight, keep fighting, don't ever give up. Again, something beautiful about it, but you see the heroic action now comes from within the self to even overcome your disease. Make a bit of sense? Yeah. All right. Now we're going to start to move to the other side, but and there are legions of these memoirs. And you know this from your communities, the spirituality that comes in exercise. There's all these stories about how exercise saved me. And exercise is really interesting as just an artifact for us late modern people, because exercise as a kind of phenomenon is fairly new. You know, like a lot of our parks, especially in urban areas, were not built for exercise. Like the reason, say, Central Park is in New York City is to help people escape from the industrial monster of the city and to sit in nature. And if you were walking in a park in 1950 or even 1960, the only people you would see running in a park were children running around, playing. Now if you are in any park, like in London or Berlin or New York City, the people who are running, maybe you can find children. Usually they're under the watchful eye of their parents at all times. But the people you see running are all these professionals with their watches on and their headphones, and they're panting as they run around. There's just adults running everywhere. And what's of course interesting is they're not running with each other like children playing tag. They are optimizing their workout plan and trying to beat their time. So there's a certain way that exercise has become this very strange late modern phenomenon. If you want a book on this, there's a great book by a German historian called The Age of Fitness. And he looks at the rise of fitness as being this very captivating reality, particularly for middle-class people across the West since the 1970s. He thinks it has a lot to do with the arrival in the late 70s, early 80s with a neoliberal capitalist epoch, where we kind of make this move where we get less protections from the government and each individual becomes their own kind of company corporation. So you get less protections in your job, but it means that you also have more fluidity in it, but you need to make yourself constantly fit as a worker to be able to get another job. So you're always working your resume, you're always trying to figure out what's your angle, you end up becoming obsessed with networking, but there's this sense that you always have to be ready and fit to do this. And he says exercise kind of comes along with this. And now you have to take responsibility for your own body, and that becomes an essential dynamic within this. Remember, just like, again, 1970s, 60s, there's a great documentary about Nike, where a guy tells a story about being the first person who was running in his neighborhood. He was the first person that started jogging. And he said he would jog in his neighborhood and cars would pull up next to him, roll down the window and go, "Are you okay?" Because they just figured if there was a grown man running around his neighborhood, he was running away from something. It's like, yeah, it was weird. Or if you watch Anchorman, to get very sophisticated here, there's that line in Anchorman where Will Ferrell's character, Ron Burgundy, is like, "Yeah, Jessica and I, we just started doing this thing. It's called yogging? Or is it jogging? I don't know how you pronounce it. Because all you do is you just run, This was not something you did until the fitness revolution happened in the 1970s. So here's a couple memoirs that illustrate this as a spirituality. There's this one called Finding More on the Mat. Now listen to the subtitle. You can hear the neoliberal kind of move here. The subtitle is How I Grew Better, Wiser, and Stronger Through Yoga. So there's this sense that even exercise makes you fit for the competition that you have to have in this kind of economy. But she finds more on the mat, and what she means is something spiritual. A really fascinating piece about this is she keeps using throughout the whole memoir that what she discovers on the mat is grace. She finds grace. Of course, she never once defines what grace is. And it plays this very dual meaning of it means grace as, I guess, some form of acceptance of oneself, but it also is the grace of the difficulty of the pose. But her whole point is in heroically being able to take the pose and take the grace of that pose, she also finds grace for herself. And she's kind of saved as she does that. I think even a better example here is this book by Hemsworth called Running Like a Girl. And this is a story about a young woman who has not been a big exerciser, but on a whim, she decides that she's going to run a marathon. I mean, she's not someone who's ever done this before. She wasn't a runner in school or anything like that, but she decides on a whim that she's going to run a marathon. She's never run a 5K. So she gets a program and she does it. And she says explicitly that learning to run a marathon changed my life. It saved me in a significant way. She even uses the word, she said, I became an evangelist for running. So she said she'd go to brunch every Sunday, not church, she'd go to brunch, and everyone would be just overwhelmed. How did you do this? How did you run a marathon? And she said she would share with them the good news about how they too could run a marathon that she could share with him. I don't know if it was the 4 spiritual laws of running or something, but essentially this could happen. She would tell them, look at me, look at my self-esteem, but look at the weight I've lost, look at this. You too could do this. I mean, if I could do it, anyone could. I mean, if I could be saved by this, you could too. And there's this deep sense of this kind of salvation that works within this. You can see it, we're starting to move over to the other side here, but I think these become the kind of 4 counter-enlightenment perspectives. Now, this is not to say these people, as we were talking about this in that kind of cultural way last night, we were naming people, it's not to say they politically are here, but the way they start to think about the transformation of their being is in this heroic act. And it is in the self being magnificent. It starts with the self, and then what the self does outside of itself, the way it makes a move outside. Does that make sense? Any thoughts about this?
I have thoughts.
Yeah.
But they're controversial.
Okay.
I just feel like, maybe that's what you're framing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's good
Yeah.
that she is being transformed and maybe she is experiencing God in the way God designed her in
Yeah.
like a physical expression.
Yeah.
It's like we have different ways of experiencing God.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like for her, Samuel hears God's voice, but he can't name it until someone helps him name it.
Yeah.
So you're not downputting
No,
her, right?
what I would not want to say is like we as Christian people and Christian leaders should be against exercise. I'm not saying that. There are legit goods here.
Yeah.
There are really legitimate goods.
Yeah.
There also is the necessity, I think, particularly, say as a pastor, to think about what are the null or tacit theological assertions that are being made here about what a human being is and how a human being is changed. The response is not to say, you need to warn every one of your people, never do a hike in the woods. And if I hear any of you went into those redwoods, then you have a real problem. No. This, in many ways, like I said last night, all of these actually are quite seeded by a Christian imagination. I mean, I think one of the things that's really fascinating, especially from the traditions I live in, vocation used to be a fundamental sense of the Christian life. So, for instance, in an early Reformation imagination, the idea is the ought is so fulfilled by God that you don't have to fulfill it, so you go to your neighbor. So vocation becomes really important. So like for Luther, he's not comfortable with sanctification. And sanctification gets moved as a move towards vocation. So to really synthesize that, Luther will say, like, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. So now go to your neighbor. Go to your neighbor, and therefore your vocation really matters. I think one of the things that's fascinating about this kind of secular age is people still feel a weight, a la Samuelson, that there's something significant about vocation, but the interconnection to the tradition of God's call and what that means and how our human lives are lived within that kind of gets disconnected in some ways. So more than saying these are bad, what I want you to see is there's actually more onus on you to be able to connect it to a larger story. And make sure another anthropology doesn't kind of colonize it and shift it into a way that can actually create huge forms of anxiety and depression and exhaustion and burnout. So it's not saying these are bad or that God couldn't speak in them. A la Cara Bart, God can speak however God wants to speak. God can speak to a dead dog, Bart says. He usually doesn't. He usually speaks through the word preached in Scripture. But God is God, and God can do whatever God wants. So to assume God couldn't move or speak in those, like Solomon, would confuse something. But this also is a big pastoral reality I think we have to confront, in the Solomon story is a good one, is it's not completely self-evident who is speaking when Solomon hears God speak. The assumption it's coming from somewhere else. You need someone to help you discern, is this the voice of God? How do I know it's the voice of God? And so I'm trying to move us into those kind of theological terrains too. I think pastoral ministry is always a process of helping people discern. Discern, is this God speaking? How do I know this is God speaking? How do I discern that for myself? How do I say that to my I mean, there's something really big about saying to your congregation, behold, hear the word of the Lord. I mean, if we don't say that with a little fear, that we would say that we're talking about God's word. It's a big one. So yeah, you're right. We're not against exercise or any of these. All right, so let's move across to the exclusive humanist side. So remember, if this is heroic, then this spiritual pathway, what's discovered is your inner, truest self is discovered. Now again, remember, I think these all have antecedents in Christianity. I think there's something about the Christian experience that helps you realize that you are loved and accepted internally. But one of the realities, I think, of this kind of secular age is that it becomes disconnected from any larger kind of transcendent frame. So you can discover this within yourself. One example that unearths this for people in these memoirs is romance. There are all these memoirs of falling in love, and falling in love helps you realize who you really were. One of the best examples of this is Out East by John Glenn. I have to tell you, this is a very strange memoir that I don't really understand. And I'll explain for two reasons. One, I don't really understand it because he is a East Coast leader, and I'm just a humble Midwestern guy, so I really don't understand these elite East Coasters. But he's like educated at Boston College or something, and then does the migration that a lot of kind of elite East Coast young adults do. Ends up down in Manhattan and working in Manhattan, living in Brooklyn, and the work life, the party life are trying to be balanced. And this is really something I don't understand. But I guess if you are a young adult living in New York City, one of the big things to do is you get a share house in Long Island. I think you're from from Long Island.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I do not live in a share.
Oh yes, right. Yes. So I guess once you get a share house in Long Island, and then I don't get this, but the whole point is you pay in, you get so many weekends, and that gives you a room. You don't really sleep in that room because you party all night long and drink, but you have a room and you get to be part of this house so many weeks, and it's kind of a, will you be invited to the share house? Will you not be invited to the share house? Well, he gets invited to the share house, so he's going to be part of the share house. But what he's yearning for, what he's deeply yearning for, the deficit he feels within himself, is that he desires to be in love. But he hasn't found what he calls a mystical kind of love. He uses that language. He hasn't found a mystical kind of love that would really help him discover truly who he is. Now, the other thing I don't understand about this memoir is it's very much, God bless you all who represent this generation. It's a very millennial text. Now, I'm a Gen Xer, so I listen to Pearl Jam and a bit depressed and that. But it isn't a bit millennial in the sense that he says this. This is my stereotype of millennials, so I apologize to you millennials. But he says that he wants a love just like his parents. Now, my stereotype of millennials is you like your parents. If you're a Gen Xer, we hate our parents. The thought of being anything like our parents' marriage makes us want to puke in the corner. The last thing we want is to have anything like our parents. So God bless you millennials, getting stereotypical. But he wants a love just like his parents. Now here's the whole hook, narrative unveiling of transformation. He goes to the share house, and during this summer, he finds the love. He finds it. But what the great discovery is it's not with a woman, it's with a man. So he falls in love with Matt, and he realizes it's this kind of intensity, this kind of love that he'd never experienced before, that really unveils who he really is. The relationship doesn't quite work out, but that doesn't matter because he has found this love. He knows who he really is right now. So there you see how romance opens that up. Second one, there's really interesting ones that are all these child-rearing memoirs. In many ways, the child-rearing memoir is the source of the memoir revolution. Because I don't know if you all remember this, but remember a couple decades ago, there were these things called blogs? Remember blogs? Yeah. So the most successful bloggers were mommy bloggers. And the revolution of memoirs basically came from mommy bloggers. These young women who were writing about their experience raising young children, and they were hilarious, and incredibly kind of insightful, and publishers read them and were like, this could be a book, and started publishing all these books. So, like I said, it was these young women who were reflecting on what it was like to be a mother, but why would this become a kind of form of spirituality? Well, it fits into what we were saying last night about being inside of an age of authenticity. Remember, we said this drive to be authentic. One of the things that arises out of that is there is a certain sense that conformity and therefore conventionality is a bad thing. You don't want conformity and conventionality. These could be oppressive realities. You want to escape those. Well, so you have this deep sense of always wanting to be the rebel. The rebel is always good. But now something strange happens, is that you've lived in this kind of ethos of being the rebel. You've been to multiple Lilith Fair festivals, which I've been to Lilith Fair festivals. If anyone wants to sing Alanis Morissette or Sarah McLachlan, I'm all for it. But you have been the rebel, and now you have a child. And you have this weird dynamic that you need to keep your rebel self, but you have this sense that what your child needs is some kind of form of conventionality. So how do you remain the rebel and also raise your child inside the conventionality that you think they might need? So you need a spiritual guide to help you. So you get some like this incredibly hilarious one, Let's Pretend This Never Happened by Jenny Lawson, which is so well written and is so funny. But it is this kind of sense, I mean, you see this kind of cultural trope where she's a really, really committed mom, but also a mess. You know, so she tells you stories about how she's never made a birthday cake. She's got to make a birthday cake for her 3-year-old. First birthday party ever. She drinks wine while she makes the cake, ends up incredibly drunk. The birthday cake, fails. But at the end of the day, she really loves her daughter, and she gave her the best birthday that she could have. So there's this kind of what it means to be the rebel, but also the always committed 100% mother. A more interesting one is The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. And it's interesting because Maggie Nelson, it's deeper because she's a philosopher, so she's giving a bit more deep reflection on this. And Maggie Nelson is someone who's fairly well known in like queer theory. So she's married to a transgendered man, but now she's pregnant, and she's going to have a son. And her whole life, she has kind of turned her back on, or at least had conflict with her mother, who is a soccer mom mother, driving a minivan and knitting coffee koozies, and she just, the last thing she ever wanted to be was her mother. Like every act she's had has been to not be her mother. Whoever she understands her inner self to be, it is not her mother. And yet now she's pregnant with this son, and she feels these deep desires to be like her mother, to buy a minivan and start knitting a koozie, and she's like, what do I do with this? So it takes a kind of spirituality to remain the rebel or the authentic person, and then also have to raise these kids conventionally. You may find it convincing, you may find it unconvincing, but it's an interesting dynamic of how you play this out. Again, searching for your most kind of inner self. I think the most prevalent on this side is what I would call the memoirs of the art of discovered talent. And the idea here is that if you can find what you are truly good at, or your kind of deepest artistic expression, it will unlock who you really are. Now, one thing I tried to avoid when I read these memoirs is I really tried to avoid celebrity memoirs. They're kind of in their own class. Except I will say, after finishing this research and publishing it, I had a few people who wrote me and were like, how come Bono's memoir isn't in here? I don't know if there's any U2 heads here, but I have to say, yes, there we go. Well, U2 people are crazy. I mean, you guys are absolutely crazy. Because I'd be like, well, the reason that Bono's memoir isn't here is because it wasn't published yet. And I'd be like, that's no excuse. That's absolutely in here. How can you have anything that talks about memoirs without Bono's in it? I mean, U2 people, you guys are crazy. You're crazy people. Now, the only exception to the rule was Brandy Carlisle's Broken Horses, which is a really beautiful memoir. And in many ways, it fills all these sides. Like, it's about romance, it's about child rearing, it's about deep spiritual experience. But the overall kind of drive of this memoir is this this deep sense of being overlooked. You know, she's overlooked her whole life. She's overlooked, her family is a kind of a struggling poor family just outside the suburbs. They're overlooked by suburban people. She's a tomboy and she gets overlooked. She sings at her church and that church kind of overlooks her family. Then she discovers she's a girl who likes girls and she's overlooked. She's overlooked, she's overlooked, she's overlooked, and yet she has a song inside of her. She has a deep song inside of her. And the kind of push here is keep looking for that song. Keep looking for that inner song. You have a magnificent inner song within you. And if you can find that inner art, that inner talent, and you can release it into the world, eventually you'll get the recognition that you deserve, that yourself deserves. So, of course, the memoir ends with her hit album and Elton John calling her and saying he loves her song. The idea is there's some inner talent in you, some unique kind of voice within you, and if you can unlock that, you can be saved. Another example of this, which I think is actually the best memoir I read, was Educated by Tara Westover. Maybe some of you have read this. It's a great memoir. So if you know the story, what's going on here is she's a young woman and she lives up in the Idaho mountains. Her father is a prepper. He's preparing for the end of the world. And so he never sends his kids to school. I mean, if you are a Mormon prepper in the mountains, why would you send your kids to school? First of all, you're waiting for the end of the world, so they need to be educated, but like how to live off the land and how to ambush a government vehicle. They don't need to learn anything that a school would teach you. And why would you send your kids to school? That's a government institution. You don't trust that. So she's never gone to school. She's been living in the mountains, never gone to school a day in her life. Well, good news comes. Her father gets the date of the end of the world. He knows it's coming. It is going to arrive. And many of us lived through this. And some of us maybe didn't think it was the end of the world, but thought the apocalypse was coming as well. It is going to happen on January 1st, 2000. This little thing called Y2K is going to occur. The end of the world is going to happen. He's realized this is what I've been prepping for. I've been prepping for civilization to fall, the January 2nd, and we're set. And I don't know, you all remember, not all of you, some of you remember this. I remember my mother, I was living in LA at the time, and my mom called, and she is very Minnesotan. So she called me with her deep Minnesota accent. She said, "Hi, how you doing? Oh, so you getting ready there for the end of the world and stuff?" And I was just, well, okay, well, you be careful and stuff, because it could get bad, You know what I think you should do, honey? I think, why don't you fill up the bathtub? And just fill it up, because then if the water doesn't work, at least you got some water there in the bathtub. I did it. I filled up my bathtub. I put a cup next to the tub, and I was ready to live for a week or two on bathtub water. That's what I was expecting. And I remember by 12:15, 12:30, there was no apocalypse. And I remember before I went to bed around 1 or 2, I opened the drain and let all the water out. I got to tell you, I felt a little disappointed. I didn't get to live on bathtub water for a couple of weeks. Well, her father's ready for this, and he's disappointed, a little bit more disappointed than I was, but it doesn't come. Leads to conflict in her family, violence breaks out. She ends up stumbling out of the woods. And she stumbles out of the woods, and she doesn't know what to do. Well, there's a program at Brigham Young University to show you how many kids live up in the mountains that we don't know about. They have a whole program that if you've never gone to school a day in your life, if you can pass the test, you can immediately start to matriculate at BYU. She passed the test. Her first day of ever going to school, like ever being in a classroom, is in a classroom at BYU. Talk about imposter complex. She does not know if she can do this, what goes on. As the narrative unfolds, she doesn't know if she can learn. Well, she discovers not only can she learn, but she's a great student. She ends up a Rhodes Scholar. She ends up with a PhD, a master's degree from Cambridge, a PhD from Harvard, or vice versa. She ends up becoming, greatly educated, and not only can she learn, but she's an incredible student. And the overall push of the book, which is a beautiful book, and again, this is something I actually would hold to and believe, but larger perspective is, you too can learn. Education could save you too. It saved me. It could be education that unlocks this. But you can unlock your inner genius. She really had an inner genius within her, and it took her actually going to school to open that up. I mean, there's part of me that really wants to hold to that as an educator, that education can transform. So it's not all bad, but you see this deep sense that this is within you. Now again, what I want to point out here is that you see this kind of anthropology again. The self is magnificent. Now instead of in the heroic action, where it starts in the self and it's what the self does outside, the kind of spirituality here is it starts in and it opens up what you believe is really true about you. So it starts in the self and it opens up to knowledge of the self. And that becomes transformational. Yeah?
Where would you put Hillbilly Elegy?
That is a great question. I don't know. And I read it, but it has been a long time. I have to think about that. That is a really, really great question. There's a certain way that it feels a bit like this book. That's a really great question. I have to think about that one. That is a
She had a
good
messed
question.
up family life, which is a lot of the book too.
Yeah, she did.
Religion and family.
Yeah,
It's a very abusive.
yeah, absolutely. And education can get you away from that. But what it ultimately does is it gets you in touch with who you really are, and what you really are capable of. All right, does this make a bit of sense?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess to be a little provocative, you could have stories of celebrity pastors in it too, right?
Yeah.
The really good orator of, now I can speak to you in a way that,
Yeah.
but that isn't really connected to transcendence.
Yeah, you absolutely could. Yeah, I mean, in any sense, kind of being able to perfect even a craft could become that in any way. And again, this is not to say these are bad in and of themselves. And again, like I said, they're seeded by the Christian tradition. I mean, no doubt that you are beautifully and wonderfully made. It comes from a certain theological Christian imagination, as does even the heroicism of the act of the body doing something. I think I said this, I don't know if I said this in the group or as a couple of us were talking last night, like a medieval pilgrimage is a heroic act. But it also is done never flinching that it is done ad diem, to God. And what happens, I think, in this kind of secular age is the ad diem part can be erased. And so now you can, quote unquote, kind of do a pilgrimage that has no God in it. And it could be transformational. It even could be therapeutically healthy. All these things could have therapeutic gains to them. But they also make an assertion, is my argument, they make an assertion of a certain kind of anthropology, that the self is magnificent. And all you need to do is be able to access that some way. Yeah.
Could you tell us how could you have a spiritual small s transforming experience without the spirit capital S?
Yeah. That's where I want to go right now.
Okay.
Because I think the kind of spirit that would come in the transformation into the person of Jesus Christ, incarnate, crucified, resurrected, ascended, starts from a very different anthropology. Now this is a theological wager I'm making, but I want to show you very different ones now.
Or is the capital S spirit working in the small s spirit, preparing that person for the next step after they think they've arrived?
It could. I would not want to eliminate that. However, and this is what I want to show you now.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, this is what I want to show you now is that I do, and again, this is just a wager I'm making, a certain theological commitment I'm making, is that the transformation of the Spirit moves in the dynamic of death to life. And that it moves from the place of the cross. And so these don't necessarily inherently have the cross central in them. And partly because the self ultimately doesn't need anything from outside of it. It has its capacity within it. So I do think we would not want to make an argument, and I think Haley was moving there with some of the things she was saying, is that you can't really not be possessed by something. Some spirit will possess you. And the question is, what spirit are you going to allow to possess you? Now, to late modern ears, that sounds just damn weird, to make that assumption. But there is a certain way that this is a direction that you feel the move of salvation. I'm also making an assertion that every human being has to find a way to aim towards some sense of being saved. And so are those resources within you, or are they outside of you? And I think it makes a big difference here. And again, I want to show you these examples, but I saw another hand out of the corner of my eye.
The end point is self to all of these. So the
Right.
problems are addressed, the need for some sort of salvation is
Yeah.
exposed, but the end point is the self will save the self. And you have the resources within yourself if only
Yeah.
you discover them.
Right. Yeah, and you can see that I'm very committed to a certain theological anthropology that actually views sin itself as the curving in on the self.
And it ends up causing all of the anxiety and the depression. I mean,
I think so.
it's not an accident
Yeah.
that those are on the rise.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons we find ourselves at an acute moment of anxiety and depression is it's not only that we've turned in on ourselves, but in many ways we've made the self the location of any ultimacy. And if you see yourself in kind of Calvin's perspective that human beings have to, human beings are an idol factory. The idol has become the self.
Yes.
And so, or, as we were talking this morning, like what's Baroque now is not the outside worship space. What's become Baroque is your inner life. That's the kind of Baroque sense of it. And again, this is not to disparage the value and beauty of the human person or human personhood, but it's actually to say that this can, when we curve in on ourselves, something corrosive happens to us. And while all these might be good, they run the danger of really curving in on the self. So let me show you some examples of other memoirs that have a very different kind of experience. Now, the temptation here, of course, is to think like, well, these are all memoirs from pastors or missionaries. I have to tell you, I read a lot of those. They were brutally bad. Not yours. Yours was great. I love yours. But they were not good. So the memoirs that I found that have a very different kind of implicit driving theological anthropology did not come from people trying to make a case for church or even trying to make a case for Christianity. They came from people who were having very different life experiences, but those life experiences in a very beautiful way led them to the possibility of a personal God who can meet them, of a gift that came from outside of them that could save them. So let me give you some examples of these. One of these, I think, beyond ones is there's a group of memoirs about loss, but loss that then is met by friendship. Best example of this one, and be careful with this book, called How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. I say be careful with this. I had a student who read it. Well, he didn't read. He took every one of these memoirs and then got the audiobook of them and would listen to them as he dropped his kids off at school. This is not the one to listen to on audiobook with children in the car. This is basically a memoir about this guy's sex life. So he's like, he texts me, he's like, all the sex, my gosh. It is a fairly graphic memoir, but it ends in this incredibly beautiful way. So it's about this young African-American man and his mother, single mother raising him, and it really is a memoir about a young black man being raised by his black mother in both the utter commitments and tensions that exist in that relationship and how they negotiate it. And then his own experience of trying to figure out who he is, while the way the memoir unfolds is that he loses his mother. She dies. And it thrusts him into incredible depression. The grief of losing his mother and the beauty of their relationship and yet the tensions of it, he just doesn't know what to do. Well, he inherits just a little bit of money from her estate. And he decides the best way to honor her is to travel with it. So he's traveling around Europe, and he's really in a very depressed state. He doesn't really want to talk to anyone. He just is there trying to heal, trying to figure out what was going on with this relationship. He's staying at a hostel, and by happenstance, he meets a woman named Esther from Canada, who's in her like late 60s. He's like in his late 20s. They decide that they'll see the sights together. They essentially, without saying anything, make a contract. They won't really talk, but it's better to have someone next to you as you see the sights. And so they do that. For about 2-3 days, they just go see the cathedral, they nod at each other, maybe point a few things out, say, hey, good to see you, and then they meet the next day, do the same thing. Well, after doing this for a few days, and it's their last night, they decide they're going to have dinner together. So they have dinner, and he says in the midst of that dinner, he turns to her, and he says, I'm here because I lost my mother this year. And she turns to him and says, I lost my mother this year too. And that experience of a mutual confession of brokenness and having this other person share it and hold it, he says, I felt held. I felt deeply held and cared for in this moment. You can hear it's not, I had something in me that was great. It's that I was broken and lost. And when I confessed this to another person and they held it, and they shared their experience with me, in this mystery of this friendship of shared consolation over shared suffering, I found a deep transformation within it. A similar one is Lost Through Nature. This is a memoir worth reading, Wave. It's about a woman who lives in the UK, but is from Sri Lanka and goes home every year for the Christmas season in Sri Lanka. And she is home this year, and every year what they do is her parents live up in the mountains. They celebrate Christmas Eve and Christmas in the mountains. And then on Boxing Day, they go down to the beach, and they rent some rooms right on the water. And that's what they do this year. She's got 2 kids, both under 8 years old. And she goes down, and they get a place, her and her husband and her 2 kids, and her parents get a place next door. They wake up on the 26th of December. It's beautiful. Just beautiful blue day. They're just enjoying the leisure of this, and she just feels so great to have her family with her, and everything's wonderful. Well, she goes out on the balcony, and you know what's going to happen here. This is going to be the tsunami. She sees this very strange thing. All the water has been pulled back. She calls her husband to come look at this, and the water starts rushing in, and it starts rushing in, and it starts rushing in. She looks at her husband. They realize they have got to get out of there. They grab their 2 children, again under 8 years old. They go next door, pound on their parents' door, grab them, they get into a Jeep. That Jeep takes off, tries to get out of the way. She says it's like that Jeep gets enveloped like it's a sugar cube. She's holding one of her children, and she feels the whole Jeep just flip. And the last thing she remembers is holding on to one of her child's hands and letting go. She comes to wrapped around a tree. They find her, they bring her back to her parents' house, and they start looking. They look for her 2 children, they look for her husband, they look for her parents, they look for a day, they look for a second day, they look for a 3rd day. Then the doctor shows up to her parents' house in the mountains. She's just battered up, scraped. The doctor checks her out, gives her antibiotics and says, you probably have some infections from all these cuts. You should take these antibiotics. She says she looks at those antibiotics and she thinks, why? Why would I do this? Because as soon as I get word that my children and my husband are dead, I'm going to kill myself. Why would I do this? Well, she does get word. Both her children are dead. Her husband is dead. Her parents are dead. The whole rest of the memoir is her racing away from the grief. She spends the next decade and a half trying to stay away from the grief. She never goes back to her house in the UK. She just sells it. Whenever she gets any email from her old life, like say kids in the neighborhood are going to graduate from high school, she can't even look at the email. She can't even look at the picture. Every thought is, my kid should be here. Incredible amounts of survivor's guilt. So she spends the next decade and a half running from her grief. She always goes back to Sri Lanka. Her sisters are still living there, but she has never been back to the ocean. She will not look at the ocean. It took everything she loved. She will not even look at it. Well, we're now 10, 15 years later, she gets an invitation to go whale watching. She doesn't want to go. She has said no to everything like this in her life because she's so afraid it will remind her of one of her family members and the grief will crush her. So she thinks, I can't go whale watching. Vic, her oldest, loved whales. He should be on this whale watching. It shouldn't be me. She decides for some reason to go. And she's on the boat, and the captain says, starboard, whatever, the whales are coming up. These beautiful whales are surfacing. And she thinks to herself, as she's done this for a decade and a half, don't look, don't look, don't look. The grief will destroy you. The grief will destroy you. But something in her decides to look. And she looks and she sees the beauty of this whale come out of the water. And for the first time, it releases her to make the confession of her grief. To stop running from her grief, but to surrender to it. And she surrenders to that grief, and for the first time, she says she feels, through the beauty of nature, she feels something reach for her. It's very different than the salt path where you overcome it. It's in the midst of surrendering that you just do not have the power to protect yourself from this grief and letting go of the grip on the grief, that she finds the beauty of these whales speak to her. And she says God speaks to her in the midst of this moment. But you see the very different anthropology. Anthropology isn't you have it in you, you can do it. It's that there's impossibility wrapped all around you. And will you confess that impossibility? And if you confess that impossibility, you're going to find a great mystery. And the great mystery is that God made known in Jesus Christ. Eberhard Jungel, the great German theologian, says, where nothingness and new possibility moves, there is God. God is the God who comes into nothingness and brokenness and brings new life out of it. This is where God acts. But there is a move on the human agent. You have to confess you don't have it in you to save yourself. And this God moves in the midst of that reality. Another example of these are these imminent dying ones. They're a bit like the sickness narratives, but the difference from the sickness narrative is, shockingly, these people die, actually. The sickness narrative, you never give up, and conquer your illness. But there are all these memoirs where people actually die. And they are really quite beautiful. The one I'll just point to is When Breath Turns to Air. Beautiful piece. I read this one summer day on my porch, and my porch is like here, and then there's a sidewalk probably to the third row right there, but pretty close. Strollers, Minnesota, like everyone's out on a sunny day, and I read this, and there were just people coming by, and one of the beauties of these books is the last chapter usually is the person writing a letter from their deathbed, and this one is really quite beautiful. He's a doctor. He's in this area, actually. I think he's at Stanford. And he's a neuroscientist, and he basically says that he doesn't care about you. Doesn't care about you. If you come in and you need to have brain surgery, he doesn't care about you. Your brain is where he beats the disease. Luke Skywalker fights Darth Vader in your brain. He's Luke Skywalker. He doesn't care about you. And then he gets diagnosed with lung cancer. And he says these words, which are really profound, that you should hear. He says, what I realized I needed as I became the patient, I did not need a heroic doctor to solve my illness. He says, what I discovered I needed was a pastor. A pastor who would help me think about what it means to live and what it means to die, who I'm living for, and what is the larger story that I'm part of here. So the rest of his career, he said he was a doctor as a pastor. He listened to his patients. He asked them what was going on. His cancer goes in remission. His wife gets pregnant. She has a baby, and just as the baby's being born, cancer's returned. The first months of his daughter's life are the last months of his life. So he dies in the midst of holding this child. So the last chapter of this book is him writing a letter to his daughter. And he says to her, so beautifully, he says, pain is going to come in this life. It is going to come. But you have to know that whatever your life becomes, your first days you ministered to a dying man. Your life has such deep, deep value, because as my days were ending and your days were beginning, you helped a dying man die well in the mercies of God. I read that and I sobbed. I was just ugly crying on my porch. And these poor people walking by, a bright sun, were like, oh my gosh. And I was like, those people coming by, like, I don't know what's going on in that porch, but I think that guy's getting divorced. I think that's what's happening. Another example is just the unwinding of the miracle, which is a very similar story that is worth reading. All right, last ones is that, and these are the kind of epic of these Beyonder narratives. They are the addiction memoirs. I mean, this is a real example of the different anthropology. I mean, the addiction to memoir says, all your heroic nights of drinking, all of your cleverness got you nowhere. It became its own oppression. So what do you do with your addiction? You have to make a confession. You have to confess, I'm Andy and I have a problem. So this is the best one I thought. Leslie Jameson's The Recovering. She's a lot like John Glenn. She's a young adult who drinks and has been drinking since she was young, going to all the parties. She's also working on a PhD. She's writing a PhD on 20th century authors, and particularly how they all used booze. So like Hemingway. Great writer Hemingway. To be the great writer Hemingway thought in his own mind, you had to be drunk. So she starts drinking. She gets into the Iowa Writers Workshop, the epic of writers. She says, what you learn at the Iowa Writers Workshop is your prose better be on point. You also learn you better be able to drink. These people will drink you under the table. Well, she discovers eventually that she has a problem. That she needs to go into some sense of recovery, that she needs to go to AA. But she thinks this is great. Actually, it's great as an author to go to AA. Post David Foster Wallace, if you know David Foster Wallace, the great and late 90s author who wrote this book that everyone says they love but no one has read, In Infinite Jest, this huge 600-page, 700-page novel. But what David Foster Wallace did, and what was so cutting edge about it, is he was in a halfway house. And so he used the stories of the halfway house to write this. So, and Fight Club becomes a kind of sense of this recovery as a way into storytelling. So she's now got to go to AA, and she thinks, this is great. I'm going to get some great stories there. Well, it becomes her turn to stand up in front of the group and say, hi, I'm Leslie and I'm an alcoholic. She's crafted a story. She's ready to perform it. She gets up and goes, hi, I'm Leslie, I'm an alcoholic, starts telling her story. And a man in the back, one of these beautifully sober saints we have, yells out while she's talking, this is boring! And immediately she hears it and she knows he's actually right. She's making no confession. She's performing. You can't bullshit a bullshitter. He knows it isn't. She realizes, I really do have a problem. She goes to the person overseeing this, the true monks of our age, chain-smoking recovery people, goes to this guy and says, I really do have a problem. What do I do? He's puffing a cigarette and says, well, what you do is you start praying. She says, I don't believe in you. Why would I pray? I don't believe in God. I don't believe in anything. She says, well, I don't give a shit. You just start praying. God doesn't care either. You just start praying. She says she starts praying. It's an act of confession and surrender. She feels God reach for her. She feels God come to her in the midst of it. But it takes this confession of surrender. I am not so magnificent. I need something outside me. And then maybe the ultimate of these addiction memoirs is Mary Carr, who actually knew David Foster Wallace, was in a relationship with David Foster Wallace. She has a child, not David Foster Wallace's child, but a child. He's about 12 years old, and she has a terrible revelation. She realizes she loves drinking more than she loves her son. She has to go into recovery. She goes into inpatient. She's in inpatient. The withdrawals are horrific. They're going to rip her apart. She finds herself on the bathroom floor in just utter pain. She does not know what to do on this dirty bathroom floor in this recovery center. So she prays. She's not someone who believes any of this. She prays in the midst of it. She feels God come to her. She feels the mercy of God come to her in the midst of it. She gets through. She goes home. And on a whim one day, her son comes home and goes, how come we don't go to church? It's like, you want to go to church? Like, yeah, I'd like to try it. So they go to this little Catholic church in their neighborhood. She's overwhelmed. She's shocked. Because what she hears in the liturgy is the exact experience she had on that bathroom floor. confession, absolution, new possibility coming out of it. She starts in dialogue with the Catholic priest. She says, I don't think I believe any of this stuff. We just start talking. Next thing she knows, she's on the church council. She says she has a deep sense of God's movement within. So we're ready for lunch, but what I want you to see is just very different theological anthropology at play. Very different sense that what you need is something from outside of you. You need the gift of that. That there is, if we wanted to put this in Luther's language, you do have to have an experience of Anfachtung. This realization that no matter what you do to save yourself, you cannot save yourself. But that is a great mercy, because if you can confess that impossibility, you open yourself up, you put yourself on the very pitch and the very terrain where the God of Israel moves, who takes what is dead and brings life out of it, who comes as a great ministering force. Robert Jensen, the great Lutheran theologian, said, whoever God is the one who frees Israel from Egypt and raises Jesus from the dead. His point is, the only God you can think about, the only God you can know is the God who acts for you. The God who is pro you, for you. This God makes God's self known in the act of coming to you. But what that means is, what if Jensen is right, that act is always an act of ministry. God always comes to minister to you. And what I want you to see as I conclude my time is there's something incredibly powerful and beautiful about the act of ministry. I would even dare say it's the most powerful form of human action we have. Culturally, completely devalued. Everyone would say, be a venture capitalist. Go down the hill into Silicon Valley, be an innovator. Say, be a lawyer. Be all of these other forms of human action. Pastor, minister, very low form of human action. But it's not. It actually, in a hidden way, maybe in an absurdity, in Paul's sense of the absurdity of the gospel, is the most powerful form of human action we have. In its weakness, it has to remain weak. But in its weakness, it's the strongest, because it's the only form of human action that participates in death and allows life to come out of it. And what all these people in this moment of surrender and confession experience is a reality of ministry, a feeling ministered to, cared to. We are the kind of human creatures who need others to minister to us, to care for us. And our suffering is essential in this imagination, not because suffering should be glorified, because it reminds us of who we really are, the kind of creatures who need others to care for us, that need a God who comes and ministers life out of death to us. And this is my case for the theology of the cross in a big way. So you see how these all play. So we should affirm, exercise all those things, but there still is the question, I think, for us is kind of what theological anthropology do we move out of? Do we try to Christianize those things, or do we allow people to find meaning as they find them, but really the dynamic of transformation happens when you find yourself with your hands empty and are willing to open those hands and have God give you the gift of God's presence to minister to you in those. That brings life out of death. Did do it.
You did great.
We're out of time, right? I don't even know. We're supposed to be done, right?
You entertained lots of questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the. Myself needs the affirmation. Not having broke the rules.
You're magnificent.
Thank you.
So remember, the Q&A tonight, we get an hour to try to find out which seat on these planes that have landed we get to occupy. Couple things real quick. We have people who are leaving, and please don't leave without leaving your name tag. So at lunch, if anybody's going to be leaving, just drop them on the tables outside the dining room. And then tonight, tomorrow, we'll have a box out. And so those name tags, we want to collect those. And then before we go, and